Begin the current Daf, Mesech Nedarim Daf Chav Ches, begin on the bottom of Chazayim and Beis, 3 lines up at the bottom of the Yomim. We'll continue with the fourth and final of this parak, Arbon Nedarim. We spoke about 4 different types of vows, that the neder is not a neder, you don't have to be shoyal by the Rav for the neder, automatically not, the Jizrudzin, and the Yishkagos, and now we're up to that of the fourth one, that of Nidri Einz. Today's daf are when someone takes a neder, Maharagin, Charam, and the Mukhs, and he has someone that wants to go ahead and cause him harm. So he could take a neder, interesting, he's really lying. He could say that it's truma, and I'm taking a neder to that, even if it's not truma, or I could say it really belongs to the government, even if it's not from that of the government, as a way of getting out of the situation where the guy wants to go ahead and extort money from me. Dvarim Shabbalim Dvarim is an important concept that comes in today's daf, that a person, if he has words in his heart, that's not going to be considered as words to translate or to nullify the actual words that he's saying. When we're talking about taxes, we get into this topic about that the law of the government is law and one has to follow that law. The Mishnah discusses a case on the next Mishnah, which gets into the next daf also. Let's say he says that these saplings, these trees are a carbon. If they're not going to get cut down, if it's not going to fall, then it's going to be a neder. Or this tile is going to be a carbon if it's not going to get burned. So the words of the Mishnah are yeshlam pidyon. It's really just a fancy way of saying kedoshos, meaning there is redemption, meaning obviously it's kaddish if it's redemption, and we're going to have a little bit lengthy discussion around exactly that is in the Gemara regarding that wording and what does yeshlam pidyon mean, what type of kaddish are we talking about, and the main idea really is dvarim shabbalim in the dvarim, as we'll see in the Gemara that really he only meant it because of a certain thing, and we're going to say, well, the fact that you had that in mind, what's called dvarim shabbalim, that was words in the heart, that's not considered words, and therefore, since you said it, it's going to be that of kaddish. So begin the current daf on the bottom of Chazayim and Beis, 4 lines up and the bottom of the Yomim. The fourth category of, similar to like we spoke about Nidri Einzin of the previous Mishnah, which are things beyond the control, like we spoke about it, let's say the guy, he was sick, his son was sick, so we say, okay, that's not considered a neder. This Mishnah continues on that theme. Nidrin laharagin, because these are situations of oinus, beyond the control, it's also not going to be considered as a neder. So let's say there's a Jewish bandit that kills people, thug. You can make a neder to such a guy, or the charamin, which is a guy that's a robber, or the meichsen, or if you want to get yourself out of taxes, you could take a neder, shehid truma, that it's truma, avapi, she'en truma, even though it's not truma. Or let's say you could say, she'en shal beis hamelech, that it belongs to the government, avapi she'en shal beis hamelech, even though it does not belong to the government. Now we have a machlekes b'sham mesila on 3 different points on this halacha. B'sham Me'ayim, they say, but kol nidrin, you could take a neder with, you can make any type of neder for this situation as getinta with chav ches menal, chutz me b'shvur. Except you cannot take an oath. You can't say, oh, all the paris and the oil is forbidden on me with a shvua if it's not truma. You can't take a shvua, as the Ran explains, because, as we said already in the previous stuff in this Masechta, a shvua is more chomer, more severe than an neder. It says in the Torah, you're not going to be cleansed from the sin of a shvua. So, says B'Shamay, okay, we'll let you take a neder in this situation, but not a shvua. Some they say, no, after shvua, you could even take a shvua. That's machlekes number 1. Machlekes number 2 is B'Shamay, they say, lo yiftach le b'neder. You don't open up and say, you know what, I'm going to take a neder. No, if he doesn't tell you, take a vow for me, you cannot just open up and take a neder. If he asks from you and you're in a situation, okay, then you can get out of it and take a neder. So they say, no, you could even open up and you could say, you know what, I'll swear to this effect, meaning with a neder, I'll take an oath, that's something that you can do. And machlekes number 3 is Beishamim, they say that even if, let's say, the one who's pursuing you, he says, I want you to take a neder, you should only take a neder, b'mashu madira, says Beishamim. Only thing regarding what he's asking you to take a neder on, but you cannot add on anything to the neder that they demanded of him. They say no, even if what they didn't even ask from him to prove the point, he could add on to just extend that neder. As the Mishnah explains, Kate said, how so? So let's say Amaloi, let's say the guy, this thug, is telling him, oh yeah, really? It belongs to the government? Yeah, it's really truma? Then I'm going to say, I'm taking a neder that my wife will be forbidden to have benefit from me, if it's not the case. The guy says, you know what? You know what? I'll take a neder that my wife and my kids have been benefit from me if this is not truma, if this doesn't belong to the government. So So Beishamayim, they say, as we just explained, Ishti Mutera, so the wife is permitted because that the guy's asking you to take a neder and you're allowed to do it, you're allowed to make up this nidri ointzin, you're under extreme circumstances to say it. But the children are going to be very benefit from him because that guy didn't ask you to take a neder on your kids. You offered it on your own. That's going to be usher. That you can't say that's oinitz to make the nidri ointzin. They say no, they're both going to be permitted because since this is categorical, something you're allowed to do, so we don't care that you added on an extra word, it's still going to be permitted. Now the Gemara has a question that on the whole concept of this Mishnah, one of the cases we're talking about, one of them was Lameichsen, we're talking about for taxes. So the Gemara wonders, how could you make a neder to get yourself out of taxes if from the Iker Halacha you have to give taxes? As the Gemara explains, Shmuel says, Dina the Malchusa Dina, that the law of the government is the law. Now, the Ram brings from Taisus that we're talking about specifically a non-Jewish government, that we really, I don't know if it's necessarily government, but Melech, a non-Jewish king. That's where we say Dina Malchusa Dina. Why is it that? Because the land belongs to him, and he could tell them, if you don't do as my commandments, I'm going to chase you out of the land. So that's where we say that the law is the law, because it's really Dina Mominus, it's really monetary law. He owns the land of the country, and he could kick you out. So therefore he has the rights to say that you have to pay me this and this amount of taxes. But by a Jewish king it wouldn't be like that. Because Eretz Yisrael, all the Jews are partners in that, and therefore we don't have to give taxes to anyone that tells us to. Now, moreover, says the Ran, when do we say Dina Malchusa Dina? That's regarding that if, let's say, somebody bought the rights to the taxes, so then you have to give him the taxes. So too, if, let's say, he didn't acquire it, but he was appointed to collect the taxes, then we're saying that the Jewish person cannot swear to say that it's truma because there's no einus, because of Dina Malchusa Dina. Now, very important, many Gemaras have from the censors, from the Christian censors, that they omitted certain words from the Gemara. So on some Gemaras, like mine on the bottom, it brings down that the Ran has words that were omitted from the censor was miu. However, but let's say the Jewish tax collector from the non-Jewish government cannot force his Jewish friend to pay up taxes unless he's afraid of the government. Why? Because although the law of the government is law, what is it? Is a loan that you owe to the government. The Gemara tells him, not paying back a loan to a non-Jew is permitted. It's not considered gezelakim. So obviously, you could see why these sentences would be omitted from the Ran. Obviously, very powerful and weighty words regarding if a person would be obligated to give the taxes or not. Do you say it's stealing, that you're taking away what's theirs, or do you say I'm not stealing, I'm just not giving back a loan? Hafkas hava'asa is muteres. You don't have to give. You don't give it back. That's permitted. Again, that would be very weighty words. But al kaponim, the question that Shmuel is asking is Dina Malchusa Dina, which again we're explaining in the circumstance that it's something that is mandated and is obligated. So although maybe you can't force a Jewish friend, but al kaponim does the din, and a person is supposed to do that. How can you at least take a neder and say that it's a nidri eintzin, as if you could get yourself off the hook like that when that's the law? Some of Chinda Amid of Kana Mishmul says we're talking about a tax collector that is unlimited. In such a situation, that's not considered din. That's called chamsanusa. That's called robbery. And the robbery of a tax collector is not the din. It's only when there's a certain set amount that a person has to give. If he can take whatever he wants to, then we don't have any obligation to give him the taxes. Or another interpretation, the Rabbi Yana Amay says, we're actually talking about where the king did not put him in charge of the collection. He's talking about these thugs that they'll knock your teeth out if you don't pay their taxes that they ask from all the storefronts. That's what talking about that type of tax collector. There's no din malchusa dina. Him, you could swear, take an ed that this belongs to the government, this is not mine, etc., etc. And therefore, that's the case that our Mishnah is talking about. Now, one of the cases the Mishnah described was that a guy's taking a neder, either was that it's truma, or shein shel beis hamelech. You could swear, you could take a neder that, what do you mean, it belongs to the king. Even though it's not really from the kings, you could make that neder, and again, then the guy said, oh, it's the king's, I'm not touching it. Now, says the Gemara, Heichen nada. How did he go ahead and take this neder? Which the Ran explains, the Gemara's question is on the wording. You said that you're neder that it's truma. How can you make a neder that it's truma? That's not really what a neder is. You can't take a neder that it's truma. You could swear it's truma. You could take a neder that stuff are forbidden for you if it's not truma. But how are you taking a neder that it's truma or that it belongs to the king? So the Gemara just explains. It's ba'ima where he says, "Ya'asru peidas ha'olam alai." Let the fruits of the world be forbidden on me. Im einan shel beis hamelech. If it does not belong to the king. So that's what he's saying. He's just saying the foods that these people are trying to take away from him are truma, belong to the king. And if he's lying, all the fruits shall become usher to him. That's going to induce them not to take it away because they're like, oh yeah, but you'll be off the hook because it's really a negation and you're not obligated to fulfill that neder. But then the Gemara asks a question that says, Kivin Amay Asrai. Once he says it should be forbidden, and it's what does that mean? So how can you get off the hook? Meaning, those are the words you said. If you said a neder, you said a neder. So why are you let off the hook? So on that the Gemara says, no, he's only saying today. Meaning, if it's not the king's, then I'm not going to eat from it. Then I'm going to be forbidden from me today. So says, but if you say today, what do you mean? Then the tax collector not going to accept that. Of course, he's saying today, shkaya, tomorrow you'll eat from it. So what are you going to gain? So it says the Gemara, no, when he was taking the neder to this tax collector, he was saying, oh, the payers of the world will be forbidden on me. And in his heart, he said, mumbling on his breath, today. He's thinking, today. But it might be supposed to stop. But when he said with his lips, he said without that specification. Oh, that's the chiddush, says the Gemara. Although we hold dvarim shebelev in dvarim, words in your heart are not considered words. They cannot qualify your neder, and your neder should be forbidden forever. But regarding a situation of duress beyond the person's control, that's going to be different. In other words, that, as the Ran explains importantly, he says, if you would say, Yasr Peiris Oilam Alai La'olam, that the world's payers should be forbidden on me forever, then the words that you're thinking will not nullify the words you're saying with your mouth. Even in a situation like this of oinus. It's only over here where he just said unspecific. He said, Yasr Peiris Oilam Alai. The fruits of the world should be forbidden on me. Now, although in general, if you would just say those words without saying La'olam, we would assume that means La'olam forever. That's only when there's not a situation of oinus. And the reason for that is because it sounds more that it would be forever than it would mean just today. But where there's a situation of oinus, so the oinus, the context, is explaining your words that you mean for today. Since you didn't explicitly say the opposite. That's the unique case that we're talking about with that Legabe Oinz and Shani, we can say his words are to be understood as Hayoim because of the situation of oinus. Now the Ran does explain, however, that although the Gemara is concluding over here that if it was not a situation of oinus, the neder that you said would mean forever because you didn't specify. Even if you're thinking in your heart just today, that's not going to be effective. But even so, he says, if let's say someone wanted to go ahead and make a neder that he's not going to eat wheat bread, but when he said the words of the neder, he only said bread. We don't say, says the Ran, that since, you didn't specify, and it's not a situation of oinus, that you be forbidden all bread, because over here the reason is because his intention is to say a wording that sounds like it's forever. That's how you're getting the tax collector off your back. You're saying a wording that, he thinks that means forever. So therefore, if it's not a situation of oinus, it's going to mean forever. But over there, since you're intending to say wheat bread, it's just that once you said the word bread, you got stuck on your words and you didn't end up saying the word wheat. But ein piv v'libo shavin. But what he's saying and what he's thinking is not the same thing, and therefore he's only going to be forbidden in wheat bread, as the Ran says. I already wrote this in later on Perek Shvushtaim Basra and Pshat Deshmaya. Later on Daf Chavav, that we said on Daf Chavav Amabeis. But He's only saying over here, since your words sound like it's forever, you need a situation of einus to qualify that what I'm thinking is hayom and is only going to be hayom. In a situation where it's not indicated that it's going to be forever, let's say, meaning for everything, let's say bread, if you're having in mind wheat bread, it's only going to be the way it's not going to be, even though it's not a situation of einus. An important qualification that the Ran says. Now, the Mishnah had said, B'shami oimrim, we had a few different machlekes in B'sham Basil in the Mishnah. And B'sham said, B'kol, B'chulu, that you could take a neder with all types in the dark, but not a shiur. Moreover, we had another machlekes B'shami oimrim, that only b'mashu madira, you could only take a neder with what the tax collector is making you take a neder, not more than that. Whereas we said, Basil oimrim, af b'shem madira, even in what he's not making you take a neder. And it's just quoting the Mishnah. Kate said, how so? Where we said, Omali koin mishti nenusli. It says, I take a neder that my wife's going to be forbidden to me. But he says, koin mishti ubonai nenli. My wife and my children be forbidden to me. So b'shamir they say, ishtu muteras bon basurim. The wife is permitted, the children are forbidden. They say, they're both going to be permitted. So the Gemara, just as a technical, explains a seemingly contradiction from a brayso. I'm going to put it. It says, Tanu learn the brayso. B'shamir oimrim. The school of Shammai say, you shouldn't open up to the tax collector, to this murderer, to this thug, whatever it is, by saying, oh, I'll swear to this effect. After you could even open up and say, hello, don't take my stuff, because I swear that this belongs to the king. Now, the problem is, the wording sounds like, sounds like you can't just open up with an oath. Of a neder, which is lower down, sounds like yiftach that you could open up and say, yeah, I'll take a neder that everything should be forbidden on me if this is not truma, if this is not from the king. Problem is what's not within the Mishnah that says, our Mishnah says, the Beishamai say, yiftach ben neder, you're not allowed to open up even with a neder. So why are you saying can't open up with a shvuah? Can't even open up with a neder. But so, moreover, another question is, miftachu du liftach b'shvuah. It sounds like, okay, you cannot start up with him to tell him, you know what, I'll take an oath. But if, let's say, he asks you to take a neder of a shvuah, then you could. The problem is, what's not, in the Mishnah you can take a neder, whatever he asks you to do, chutz b'shvuah, even if he asks you. So those are two contradictory inferences that we have from the brayso as it applies to Allah of Mishnah. Says the Gemara, it's not a difficulty, because Tana masnitin beneder, the Mishnah and the brayso spoke about different cases to tell you the strength of one opinion. The Tana of our Mishnah spoke about a neder l'diacha koichen b'shamai, to tell you the strength of the opinion of Beishamai, that even a neder you cannot open up with. But of course, you would not be able to open up with a shvuah, and you wouldn't even be able to make a shvuah. It's just in our Mishnah when he says, lo yiftach, we want to say you can't even open up with a neder. Tana Braisa b'shvuah, the Tana Braisa spoke about a shvuah l'diacha koichen b'sil, to tell you the strength of B'sil. That even a shvuah you could open up with, but you cannot be medaik that according to Beishamai, anything from the brayso that you can't open up with a shvuah, but you could open up with a neder and you could say a shvuah. It's not true. We just wanted to tell you the strength of Beis Hill. Beis Hill was giving me present b'shvuah, but Beishamai, as we see in the Mishnah, then we said you cannot even open up even with a neder. Now that's one interpretation. Rav Shloimy says that no, he has a whole different way of explaining this halacha. He says that don't explain this brayso that is talking about the case of our Mishnah when you're swearing to a thug. Rather, hachitan is actually talking about something totally different. You can read the words very different. We're talking about someone that make a shvuah. Beishamai omer, when they said lo yiftach loi, when they said that you cannot open to him, who's lo yiftach loi? Although it seems like the same words of our Mishnah, the yiftach loi is not going on the thug. It's going on the chacham, on the rav. That lo yiftach loi b'shvuah means to say that ain't she'ela b'shvuah. The chacham cannot open up him to be mater his shvuah because there's no she'ela b'shvuah b'shamay holds. You cannot go and be shoyel on your shvuah and to be mater it. So I mean, yes, she'ela b'shvuah, but still holds that there is she'ela b'shvuah. So it's not talking about the thug. We're talking about the rav. That ain't paischala is talking about the rav cannot be paisef for him on his shvuah. Whereas Beis Hill holds that you could. A very different halacha, nothing to do with the Mishnah. That's another interpretation why it's not a contradiction from the halacha of our Mishnah. Now we continue with the halacha of the next Mishnah, continuing on the theme of Nedarim. The Mishnah tells us harinatiyas ha'elu carbon. If someone says, I want these saplings to be a carbon, and it's also a little bit related to the topic of our previous Mishnayos regarding Devarim Shabbalei, regarding what you're thinking, as we said that, you never had this in mind, and therefore those 4 Nedarim are permitted. So he says that I want these trees to be carbon. Like we said, carbon is one of the ways of being makdish something, meaning a neder. So he wants it to be hektish. Im ein niktsasis. He says, if they don't get cut down to so that's it says if they're not niktsasis. Now we'll see in the Gemara that it actually means today. But it's a little ambiguous, the word in the Mishnah. But for simple translation, the Mishnah seems to be saying that as long as the trees are not cut down, this tree will be a carbon. Tal is do carbon. This tal is going to be a carbon. And in this rabbi said it doesn't get burnt. Now, let's say the day passes and it wasn't cut down, and the talis was not burned. So then, yesh lahem pidyon. So they're going to have redemption. What does that mean? It has redemption. In other words, sanctity takes effect on them, that it needs to be redeemed. The Gemara is going to explain why do we need to say this, and also the Gemara is going to explain why are we saying the wording it has pidyon. Why don't you just come out and say it that it's kadoshes, that it's holy? Why is it and it needs pidyon? Now that's one case. Another case the Mishnah describes is harei netiyas elu carbon. These trees are going to be a carbon ad sheyiktzu, until they're cut down. Talazu carbon ad shetisarv. So the first case was if they're not cut down, they're a carbon. Here it's until they're cut down, and here it's until it gets burnt. So what's the halacha as it continues in the days? Here it's ein pidyon. Here they don't have redemption. As the Gemara is going to explain, what does that mean, and why is there no redemption? But the Ran, he has a little bit of a lengthy discussion over here, and it's important because he keeps on quoting these 2 different opinions, which you have 2 options. You can either do like I did it last cycle and totally skip the other interpretation that he has, or you could actually explain the sugya accordingly on these 2 different interpretations. We're going to try option number 2. There is an opinion, what does this Mishnah mean? When the guy says that it should be carbon, what does it mean that these trees should be carbon? He meant that he'd be makdish it for the value of a carbon. In other words, like its money should be used to purchase a carbon.
Until they're cut.
What?
What does it
mean?
mean?
Whichever one it is.
Well,
but
how
it
do you
should
establish
be.
the value?
So we'll see. But
Lumber?
Well, yeah, I'm saying it's value. Yeah. Whatever their tree's value is, a tree has a certain value. But however that is, whether it be lumber, whether it be the tree itself. That's what the Mishnah means when it says yeshlam pidyon, because like anything that you sanctify, it can be redeemed as long as it does not have kedushas haguf, which a tree is not a carbon itself. You just want to use its monies towards the carbon. Now those who explain, he says, however, that it's just a terminology of a koinim. There's 2 types of things saying it's carbon. In our Masechta, whenever we would say carbon, kikas do like carbon. What does that mean? It means to say it's a lashon of a neder. That's where the word kainim comes from. We said it's slang of carbon. Carbon, kamen, kainim, whatever. It's like, it's got distorted over time, whatever. So when it says this tree is carbon, which carbon do you mean? The Ran says there's 2 different interpretations. Either means to say taka carbon or real carbon. Meaning I want to take the money of the tree and then buy a carbon and sacrifice on mizbeach. Other interpretation, no, in other words, carbon, not nidrei hektish, nidrei Isser, like the Ran said in the first round in this Masechta on Daf Beis. He said there's 2 types in the Nedarim. Nidre Hektish, that Masechta, our Masechta not told, that's in Sefer Kachim. And then there's Nidre Isser. So that's the machlekes regarding what this case is talking about. So, and therefore, if you say it's a kainim, what it means to say is these trees should be forbidden like a carbon. 2 very different interpretations. And he says, if you're going to say, if that's the case, so wait a second. Where does the word pidyon come in? There's no pidyon by isurim. Pidyon is a halacha of kachim. So where would you say pidyon? It says, no, not true. The Mishnah could be like Rameir who holds, whenever you say a global kainim, that it's forbidden on everyone like hektish, actually has pidyon. As the Brisa teaches later on that Lamed Hey and Aleph. If someone says kainim kikurzu, that this loaf should be kainim, and he eats it, whether him or his friend, he's committed misappropriation, and therefore there is halacha pidyon. But if he says this loaf of bread is on me hektish, if he eats it, he gets meila, his friend does not get meila, and therefore does not have pidyon because it's not a global, has to be global like hektish. So 2 different interpretations. What does this halacha of the Mishnah mean? Okay. The Gemara asked the following question, and the Ran gives an introductory word. He says, most definitely the primary chiddush of the Tana is coming to tell us that even though he said that the kedusha of this tree is dependent on the stipulation of if this tree is going to be cut down or not, must be that the chiddush of the Mishnah is that sanctity is going to take effect on it. That's obviously what you're saying. Till when, how, what, whatever. But that's the primary chiddush. It's going to have kedusha. And we had to tell you this, as the Gemara is going to explain later on. So to ask the case, ask the Gemara a very basic question. V'lisni kedushes, ve'ein kedushes. So then say that. Hot pidyon, nish pidyon. Just say it's holy or it's not holy. Now, the Ran asked the following question. He says, this makes sense according to if you explain the Mishnah, that when it says in the Mishnah carbon, that means that you sanctified the trees for its monetary value to purchase a carbon. If that's the case, so the whole chiddush of the Tana would only be telling us that it has a kedusha, because obviously it's, that since it's kaddish, it has pidyon, so it makes sense. The Gemara's question is it should just say kedusha, so it's holy. But according to the other interpretation that explained, that we're talking about a literal kind of, meaning a nidri iser, that's also like a carbon. So what's the question that it should say kedusha? Maybe parenthetically, the Mishnah wanted to tell us yesh lam pidyon because it wanted to say anonymously like your mayor who says that a kainim kloli has a pidyon because Rabbanan disagree later on in Perek Minam either. So maybe that's the chiddush of the Mishnah. So what are you asking? You should say kedusha. No, I wanted to tell you the chiddush that it has pidyon. Says the Ran, no, it makes sense to me, the Gemara's question, because for sure, the Tana is not coming to anonymously tell us the halacha like our mayor. Because if that would be the case, then why do you need to say this halacha regarding kitzitza? Why don't you just say it in general regarding kainamas? Because if that's what the Tana needed to tell us, so you should have just said in such a case that sanctity takes effect. So you should have told us this in the beginning and said it's kedushas, and then said if you hold like your mayor, then okay, then the halacha is going to be regarding pidyon and not. But before you tell us that it's kedushas, it's not appropriate to tell them it has a pidyon, because it sounds like it was obvious that the kedusha is going to take effect, and I didn't even have to tell you, but just that it has pidyon. Not to the contrary, as the Ram says, we'll explain later on, that it was very much necessary to say that it's holy, that this kedusha is taking effect in it. And therefore the Gemara's question is, yeah, but listening to kedusha, the question would be on both interpretations that the Ram has, that it shouldn't just say it has a pidyon, it should first tell us that it has kedusha. So the Gemara says, okay, good question, but I did the Bailam Mishnah Sefer since we wanted to say in this second half of the Mishnah. In the case of Ad, that Ein Lam Pidyon, that they don't, again, we don't know what the case is yet talking about exactly, but the Sefer we had to tell us Ein Lam Pidyon, so Tanam Reishi Yesh Lam Pidyon. So therefore the Reishi, right, I would have just told you that it's Kaddish. But since the Sefer I tell you there's no Pidyon, so the Sefer I told you that there is a Pidyon. In other words, the Sefer you couldn't say that it's not Kaddish, because most definitely it is holy, the tree, until it gets cut down. That was the Sefer's case. They said that it should be Kaddish until it gets cut down. So it is Kaddish until it gets cut down. So you couldn't say that it's not Kaddish. Now at the same time, you couldn't say that there are Kaddish, because if you did say those words that the case of the Sefer is Kedushes, then you would have thought to say that Allah of the Sefer is like the Allah of the Rishon, which is not, as the Gemara is going to explain. Again, this a little bit, didn't tell you what the case yet, so a little confusing. But one thing is the case of the Sefer, of that you should say it should be holy until it gets cut down, until it gets burned. That case you had to say that there is no pidyon. You didn't say why. We don't even know what the case why it wouldn't have pidyon. But you couldn't say Kaddish or not Kaddish over there. If you said Kaddish, it would sound like it's the same as the case of the Reisha, which is not the same case of the Reisha. And you couldn't say it's not Kaddish because it actually is Kaddish until it gets cut down. I only was able to say Ein Lam Pidyon. Okay, so in the Sefer once I said Ein Lam Pidyon, and then we said Yesh Lam Pidyon. But really, Yesh Lam Pidyon, I really should have just said the more obvious way of Kaddish. I just, once I'm saying Sefer Ein Lam Pidyon, the Reisha said Yesh Lam Pidyon. Yeah, but we also wanted to tell you, well, but there's a point of, yes, true, but we also wanted to tell you this halacha of Ein Lam Pidyon, which we're going to get to in a second, why there's no Pidyon, so therefore, yeah, so really attack why I say you couldn't just say Kaddish, yeah, maybe that would be lengthy, whatever. So the Gemara asks, okay, Heichen Nada. So what's the Gemara's question? So the Ran explains that the question is on the wording, because you told me in the case of the Reisha that it's Kaddish if they don't get cut down. So the question is, since you're making the Isra dependent on this condition, how is the Isra going to take effect at all? But what do you mean? At the end of the day, the tree is going to get cut down. Meaning, you're telling me that this is going to be carbon if it doesn't get cut down. Hello? When? In 100 years? 500 years? Every tree is at risk, right? So it's going to ultimately fall down. So what are you saying that that if it doesn't fall down? Because as the Ram explains, regarding the case of the talus, if it's not going to be burned, that wasn't a question, because you're right, a talus doesn't necessarily get burned. Maybe it's never going to get burnt ever. And therefore, I understand that right now this is going to take effect. The question, however, was on the tree. It's going to be usher if it doesn't get cut down. When? It's going to ultimately get cut down, so obviously it's not usher. So what are you saying? So we don't know what's the wording of his neder. So Mameme says no, but it's where he says the tree is going to be a carbon if it doesn't get cut down today. In the day past, it doesn't get cut down. So it's going to be kaddish like a carbon. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, why do you have to say this? Pshita, obvious that it's going to be hektish. Now, the Ram again says, and if you're going to say the other interpretation that we explained, that the missions like Reb Meir, who holds global kainim, has opinion, what's the Gemara asking you? That's so pasha. To the contrary, you needed to tell me that it's not like the Rabbanan who hold that ain't lehem pidyon. So the Ram says, no, again, that's not a question like I explained, because the Tan's not coming to tell us this. He's just coming to tell us that like the Kedusha is going to take effect, as we're going to explain, and therefore that's why the Gemara is asking that Pshita, why do I need to say this case? So the Gemara says, no, the case we're talking about there was a strong wind, and that caused the sapling to be felled. And therefore what? If I didn't teach in the Mishnah that it's going to be Kadosh, I would have thought to say that since he's not entertaining that it's going to be saved, so he didn't really intend for it to be a carbon. Meaning, had he known that it's not going to be felled, that it's not going to be cut down, it's not going to fall, he would never have sanctified it. And if that's the case, I would have thought to say that it's not going to be Kadosh. Kamash Malan, that's what coming to tell you, Yeshlam Pidyon, which is another way of saying Kadeshas, that they are going to be hektish. Even though he only made the hektish because he was sure that it's going to be destroyed. Even so, now that it wasn't destroyed, it's going to be hektish. As the Gemara proves this. Because Rokatani law, what's the other case we said in the Mishnah? It was Gabi Talis. Now the question is, the Talis was straight for Kaima? You think a Talis is inevitably going to be burnt? In other words, how could the person make this condition on something that's not applicable? Obviously, that yes, in other words, what yes? That it's regarding something that is applicable for a talis. What does that mean? Where there's a fire. And therefore, the guy's saying, if it doesn't get burned, then it's going to be kaddish. What do you mean it's going to not be burned? Why would you think it's going to be burned? Because there was a fire. And the person expected it to be burned. And he says, if it's not going to be burned, Hashem, I'm going to make it hektish. So Hachanami here also nefisha. Must be the same type of context, that there was a huge wind and the trees are all flying this and that. And he says, Hashem, if these trees don't fall down, then I'm going to make them hektish. That's the chiddush. That he would have thought to say he's entertaining that's not going to be saved. Therefore he says, Hashem, I'll make a neder, I'll be makdash to you. And therefore, maybe he didn't really have in mind to make it a neder, just because he thought it was inevitable. Kamash Malan, that the Kedusha is going to take effect. Because like we're saying, he took such a neder, therefore, that's the Chiddush of the Mishnah. Now, the Sefer of the Mishnah said, which is going to take us into a long discussion in the next daf, the second case of the Mishnah was, if these trees are carbon until they get cut down, until it gets burned, then the words in the Mishnah were, Ein Lem Pidyon. They don't have a redemption. And that as the Gemara here gets very sticky. So the Gemara asks, Ula Olam? In other words, the Gemara is wondering that, how could you say that they never have pidyon forever? But even if it becomes Kaddish, it should have a pidyon. You said that until they get cut down, until it's going to be Kaddish, so why are you saying Ein Lem Pidyon? Well, why? Why shouldn't have pidyon? So you makdish it. So then be paid it. Especially if it's like the interpretation of like Kaddish or even the Kainim Klali, whatever it is. So Bapadi explains, Pedan, what happens is like this. When you redeem it, it comes back Kaddish again. Pardon, if you redeem it, it come back Kaddish again. until it gets cut down. In other words, when we said in the Mishnah, ein len pidyon, it means as long as it wasn't felled, until it wasn't cut down. In other words, not to say that it doesn't have a pidyon at all. In other words, that the pidyon should not take effect on its kedusha, because if that would be the case, well, what does it mean chayz b'kayches? Rather, what the Gemara means to say says thereon is that there's no pidyon to remove it totally from its sanctity. Rather, since you said you said it's kaddish until it gets cut down, until it falls down. You know what it's like? It's very interesting. There's so many. You have these it's a round svar that you've seen like in Nidari. It's like as if you explicitly said that these trees should be a carbon from now and a carbon when it's going to be redeemed, as long as it doesn't fall down. So it comes out that every time you redeem it, it gets reactivated in sanctity every moment, because it goes out to chulin, but right away it goes back and becomes sanctified again. That's what I'm saying. Elam pidyon. It doesn't mean pidyon. You cannot do a pidyon. It just means it's not going to be a long-term effect, because the second you're played it, boom, it goes back. Because you told me it's kaddish until it's going to get cut down. So therefore, it becomes your word now insinuated and is intimating that that it's kaddish. So it becomes back kaddish again. So then the Gemara says, but niktzatu, once it gets cut down, okay, paidim pamachas v'dalya. You redeem it one time, and that's it. It's enough. Why? So the Ran explains that Bar Pada holds that even though you are makdish it only until it gets cut down, even so, when it is cut down, so a term what's called loipaka kedusha bechti, but the sanctity doesn't just leave. In other words, you're saying it's kaddish until it gets cut down. Now it's cut down. That doesn't remove the sanctity. You got to be paid it. Okay, now it's going to be pada. Now it's going to be chul. So two halachas. One is that as long as you're being makdish and being paid, it doesn't help. It's going to go back and be makdish. It can be kaddish again until it gets cut down. And then when it gets cut down, you still need to be paid the one last time. However, Ulam he says no. Kivin should niktzitzu. Once it's cut down, shuv ein paidin. You don't have to redeem it anymore. Why is that? Because he holds that the kedusha is only going to extend only until the time that you were makdish. You had an expiration date on the hektish. But from that time onwards, okay, your kedusha was only until it gets cut down. Once it gets cut down, that removes the kedusha.
How would it work with the talus?
What?
The talus is burnt.
It's burnt and...
So then you have to put it after it's burnt.
You want to know if it's burnt to like ashes? You want to know what, what the qualification of that? Yeah, okay, we're talking about the tree. You have to know what does that mean. If it has some type of shabbos, you would have to be bladed. If it doesn't, then not. Then it's a moot point, But this is, let's say, regarding the tree, it's cut down, so then that for sure this discussion would apply. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you have to know if it's pulverized, then it has nothing.
I'm saying even before.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Exactly. Maybe Maybe nisrafas would be only singed, and it's burnt, and you have to know how to qualify that. What does burnt mean? But I'll upon them. Now, one final thought, which is actually a huge conversation here in the Ran, but we'll touch it. He brings in the Rajba. Very interesting. It's mamish like lumdis over here. Ula, says the Rajba, Ula doesn't disagree on Bapada only regarding after it was cut down. Meaning, according to Bapada, the Kedusha is not removed just as such. You still have to do one more redemption after it gets cut down. Whereas Kedula, it's removed because of the expiration date. When it gets cut down, it's gone. But until it's cut down, says the Rajba, according to everyone, you have to redeem it. Meaning, once you redeem it, it goes back and can become sanctified again. And therefore, the Mishnah says, in Pidyon, there's no redemption because it's going to keep on being reactivated. Now, he has a whole discussion over here based on this, but Al Kapam, that's what the Rajba holds. Now, he brings that one from the Chacham HaGadol Moshe Kartavi that disagrees with him. And he says that Bar Pada and Ula disagree on 2 points. Fascinating the way he says this. Pashtus would be like the Rajba. It sounds like from Ula, they only disagree on that 1 point, and regarding the point that we're getting constantly be reactivated, that sounds like from the Mishnah, in Pidyon. Says the Moshe Kartavi, no. Said Bar Pada and Ula disagree on 2 points. And actually they're interdependent. It's like Spitz Lamdis that you show what's called Lishitasam, that they're dependent on the other point. Because Bar Pada holds that sanctity cannot just be removed as it is. What's called lepaka bechti, it can't just be removed, even though it's fell. You still have to redeem it. Therefore, he says, when you redeem it, it's automatically going to be re-sanctified. Why? He says, interesting. He said, if not for this case, if not for this svara, if not for this logic, why would the person say yiktzitzu until it gets cut down? In other words, if you're coming to tell me that after this point, the kedusha will be removed by itself, you can't tell me that, because kedusha is not pakabechti. So if that's the case, why didn't he just conclusively be makdish it and say forever? You're going to have to redeem it. Why is he saying achikatsu? Obviously, what he means to say is that even if he's going to redeem it before it gets cut down, meaning if there's no expiration date and you have to redeem it anyway, so what are you saying achikatsu? What does achikatsu help? Must be achikatsu's Talmud can tell you that even if I redeem it, it's going to go and be re-sanctified again. Therefore, when the Mishnah says Elam Pidyon, it's not coming to tell me that you don't need to have a pidyon when it gets cut down, because that's not possible, because Kedusha Bechti Lepaka. Rather, it's coming to tell me that the pidyon is not going to really take it out eternally for Chulin until it gets cut down. But Ula disagrees on that, and he says, no, after it gets cut down, Ein a tzricha pidyon, doesn't need a redemption, because Kedusha Bechti Paka, it gets removed by itself. If that's the case, according to Ula, when he says Achayiktzitzu, he's not coming to tell us that even when he redeems it, it's going to go back to the sanctity until he cuts it down. You know what he's saying, Achayiktzitzu? To tell you that it's going to be Kaddish only till that point. But from that point on, it gets removed the Kedusha. It's expiration on the Kedusha. Why didn't Ula explicitly disagree with Bar Pada regarding the first halacha that he says that when you redeem it, it goes back and becomes Kaddish again? Because it didn't have to. Because Bar Pada himself didn't say this only because he holds that even after when it gets cut down, you need to redeem it as we explained. And since Ula disagrees with him on that halacha, and he says that no, that since it gets cut down, you don't have to redeem it anymore, so therefore obviously he's disagreeing on the whole halacha. And therefore, according to Ula, when the Mishnah says Ein Lam Pidyon, that's the chiddush of the Mishnah, that someone that's makdish something until a set time, from that time on, the kedusha is just removed, and you don't need a pidyon. Not that Ein Lam Pidyon is such a different interpretation. Not that it doesn't have a pidyon because it's going to get reactivated again like Mapada. Says Rav Moshe Kartavi, Ein Lam Pidyon means you don't need to have a pidyon. That's exactly the chiddush of the Mishnah. And he brings the right from the Yerushalmi. It's not but fascinating how he says that no, they're disagreeing on both points, and according to Moshe Kartavi, the Ula has a whole different interpretation of the word Ein Lam Pidyon, and he's disagreeing on both halachas. That you don't need a pidyon after it gets cut down, and even if you redeem it, it doesn't become reactivated again in Kedusha. Why should it be reactivated in Kedusha? Because that's only because you're saying Ashikitzu, why would you say it? According to me, I'm saying it because to tell you that that's where it's going to expire. So therefore, he disagrees with the Rashi. Thank you to any time, those things. Fascinating.